What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a wild story for you about how the Pinewood Lake Homeowners Association, led by the infamous Karen Clark, tried to evict me from my grandfather's cabin in Minnesota, claiming I was trespassing on their land. But they had no idea I was about to uncover Karen's $2 million mistake that flipped their whole scheme on its head. This fight isn't just mine, it's for every homeowner who's ever been bullied by a power-hungry HOA. Drop a comment with where you're watching from, smash that like button, and let's dive into this crazy tale. 3 months ago, I inherited my grandfather's cabin at Pinewood Lake, a peaceful gem 3 hours from the city in Minnesota. Growing up, I spent every summer there, fishing off the dock with Grandpa Porter, playing cards on rainy days, and soaking in the lake's magic. Those memories faded after my parents' divorce when I was 15, and I hadn't been back in nearly 20 years. As a forensic accountant, my life is buried in spreadsheets, and vacations are a myth. But after a soul-crushing tax season, I decided it was time to reconnect with my childhood and check out my inheritance. The drive to Pinewood Lake was pure therapy. City concrete melted into rolling farmland, then dense pine forests reflecting in glassy lakes. The air hit different, crisp, laced with pine sap and lake water. When I turned down the gravel road to the cabin, something in my chest unclenched. There it was, a modest A-frame nestled by the lake, frozen in time. Knotty pine walls that smelled like campfire, a sagging couch where Grandpa and I played endless rounds of gin rummy, dusty fishing lures on the mantel. It was all there. That first night, I sat on the deck with a cold beer, watching the sunset paint the lake orange and purple. For the first time in months, I felt at peace, planning repairs. New deck boards, a fixed kitchen faucet, maybe even the boat dock Grandpa always dreamed of. But at 6:00 a.m., my vacation turned into a nightmare. 3 armed security guards pounded on my door, jolting me awake. Carwin Porter, the tallest one, barked, clutching a clipboard, "You have 48 hours to vacate this property." They shoved a thick envelope of eviction papers in my face, claiming my cabin encroached on HOA land by 50 feet, violating community ordinances and posing a safety hazard. I stood there in my pajama pants, coffee mug in hand, completely blindsided. "This has to be a mistake," I stammered. "My grandfather owned this cabin for over 50 years. They just shrugged, pointing me to Karen Clark, the HOA president. "Office opens at 9, the tall one said as they climbed into a white SUV with Pinewood Lake Community Association, in fancy navy lettering and peeled out. Still reeling, I wandered to the small dock where I'd spent countless childhood hours, legs dangling, fishing rod in hand. The weathered planks felt like home under my bare feet, but something caught my eye-fresh scratches on the posts and signs of recent boat tie-ups. My neighbor, Shanley Maddox, a weathered man who'd fished with Grandpa for 40 years, approached. "You must be George's grandson," he said, shaking my hand. When I told him about the eviction notice, his face darkened. "That's Karen Clark's doing. She took over the HOA 3 years ago and's been on a power trip, pushing out original cabin owners for her development company." He lowered his voice, glancing around. "I think her constant harassment wore your grandpa down before he passed last winter." Back inside, I tore through the eviction papers. The legal jargon was deliberately obtuse, claiming my cabin was a property value threat due to its alleged encroachment. My stomach churned at the thought of losing Grandpa's cabin, my last tie to those summers. Later, while checking the dock, I asked Shanley about the scratches. He snorted, "Karen's been renting your dock to weekend tourists for $2, $100 a pop since your grandpa passed, prime real estate, deep water, great fishing." My shock turned to rage. Not only were they trying to steal my property, but they'd been profiting off it while Grandpa's body was barely cold. That night, a folder fell from the bookshelf, labeled Pinewood Lake Original Survey, Keep Safe, in Grandpa's precise handwriting. Inside was a yellowed 1963 survey, property deeds, and a journal. The survey showed my property extended 70 feet to the lake, including the entire shoreline, way more than the HOA map claimed. Grandpa's journal detailed a long, running dispute with the HOA, including a visit from Karen 5 years ago. She'd offered to buy his lot for a lakefront revitalization project at a laughably low price. When he refused, she hinted at new regulations that might deem his property non-compliant. Grandpa, a retired land surveyor, had documented everything meticulously, as if he knew this day would come. The next morning I drove into town to make copies of Grandpa's documents. Then I met Era Finley, an environmental lawyer and my neighbor to the north, over coffee. She reviewed the survey, her eyes lighting up. "These are gold. Your grandfather's documents show you own the cove where Karen built her community dock. Land boundaries don't change without legal documentation. Either they have newer surveys, or they're stealing your land." Era explained Karen's company, Pinewood Development Corporation, was building luxury condos across the lake, and my deep water cove was critical for their yacht marina. Without it, her $2 million project would collapse. "Your lot is the key to her whole plan," Era said, tapping the survey. That afternoon, Karen herself pulled up in a cream-colored suit, flanked by 2 men with clipboards, snapping photos of my deck like she owned the place. "Mr. Porter," she said, her voice dripping with fake politeness, "your railing violates safety code, and that boat needs HOA registration." She pointed to a new security camera on a tree aimed at my cabin, claiming it was for community safety. I stepped forward, holding Grandpa's survey. "There's a mistake with my property boundaries," I said calmly. She waved me off. "Those outdated documents were superseded years ago. The community has evolved, Mr. Porter." She handed me a $200 fine for unauthorized parking, and a packet of new regulations, her smile never reaching her eyes. As she left, I noticed her men photographing my car, my boat, even my bird feeder. I called the county assessor's office and learned Grandpa had filed for a property reassessment 6 months before his death. The results, finalized 3 weeks before he passed, matched his 1963 survey, confirming my ownership of the shoreline and riparian water rights to the cove. This meant Karen's community dock, the heart of her rental business and condo plans, was technically on my water. Tucked in Grandpa's journal was a letter, dated weeks before his death. "Carwin, they'll come for the property when I'm gone. The truth is in the surveys. Don't let them take what's yours. I should have stood stronger, but you can finish this." Tears stung my eyes. Grandpa hadn't given up. He'd been preparing me for this fight. I attended the monthly HOA meeting at the community center, a flashy glass and stone building designed to woo condo buyers. Karen ran it like a dictator, cutting off questions about rising fees and selective rule enforcement. When I stood to address the boundary dispute, citing HOA bylaws allowing discussion of issues impacting community resources, she tried to shut me down. "Property disputes aren't for open meetings, Mr. Porter," she snapped. I held up the county's letter. "You've been renting my dock without consent. I have official documentation confirming my property extends 70 feet to the lake." The room buzzed with murmurs. Jeffrey Taylor, the harbor master, stood up. "His documents are valid. The dock requires his permission to remain." Karen's smile cracked, but she quickly adjourned the meeting. Karen's retaliation was brutal. My water and electricity were cut off, with a notice citing emergency infrastructure upgrades that would take weeks. Era helped me install solar panels and a water filtration system, sharing that Karen had pulled similar stunts on others, like the Hendersons, who gave up after 2 weeks without water. Era had uncovered more. Karen's condo project involved major wetland disruption, with falsified environmental reports signed by her attorney, Douglas Price. 3 county commissioners approving the permits were investors in her company, a blatant conflict of interest. I started documenting every HOA violation, the unauthorized camera, the utility shutoff, workers photographing through my windows. Then Shanley gave me a package Grandpa had left with him, a clock with a hidden camera, perfect for discreet recording. A note read, "Sometimes you need to see what happens when you're not looking." I set it up in my cabin, and it caught Karen instructing workers to break in and strip it clean, removing family photos and heirlooms. One night, I woke to find workers changing my locks and hauling my belongings to storage containers labeled Pinewood Development Corp. I called the sheriff, but he didn't show up for 18 hours, calling it a civil matter and shrugging off the breaking and entering. Turns out Karen's husband played poker with him weekly. Feeling the walls closing in, I considered giving up. I called my mom, nearly in tears. "Maybe it's time to let it go, Carwin," she said. "Your grandfather wouldn't want you suffering." But then Ira found me at the diner, insisting I stay at her cabin. Shanley and other neighbors were there, sharing their own stories of Karen's harassment. Fines for garden plants, blocked driveways, towed cars. She owns half the county officials, Shanley said, but people are getting fed up. That night, I read more of Grandpa's journal. His final entries showed a man worn down by Karen's tactics, but he'd written, "I've left everything Carwin will need if he chooses to stand his ground." I slammed my fist on the table. "Enough," I said. "They did this to him, but they won't do it to me." I filed for an emergency injunction against the HOA for illegal eviction, breaking and entering, and theft. Ira's legal contacts got us a hearing in 48 hours. Meanwhile, neighbors came forward with statements about Karen's bullying. Using my accounting skills, I dug into HOA financials Shanley had collected. The numbers were a mess. Fees had risen 200% in 3 years, yet roads and common areas were crumbling. Nearly $700,000 had been funneled to Karen's company as administrative expenses. Her development firm was drowning in debt, using HOA funds to stay afloat. My Properties Cove was her last shot at saving her condo project. At the hearing, the judge was skeptical until I showed the clock camera footage of Karen's illegal entry. He issued a restraining order, barring the HOA from my property and restoring my utilities. That night, I legally removed their dock, leaving their boats stranded in the public marina. Word spread and neighbors started reaching out, some with quiet nods at the store, others with whispered encouragement. Daniel Atkins, an HOA board member, met me secretly, passing me records showing Karen falsified meeting minutes and diverted funds. "Her company's bankrupt," he said. "She's desperate." At an emergency board meeting, I walked in with a projector and a thick folder. Karen was pushing a $3,000 per household assessment to fund a lawsuit against me. I interrupted, "Before you vote, see what your president's been doing with your money." I showed financial records of embezzlement, falsified minutes, and Karen's recorded orders to fabricate violations. The room gasped when I played her saying, "I don't care what violations you create, just get him out. The investors are breathing down my neck." Then Karen snapped, admitting her plan. "Once the condos are built, property values will triple, pricing out the riff-raff." Someone recorded her meltdown, and it went viral in the community. The board voted unanimously to remove Karen as president, cancel all evictions, and audit the finances. Her company collapsed as investors bailed, and the condo project was shelved. The county prosecutor opened a fraud investigation, and Karen sold her lake house to cover legal bills. Daniel, now interim president, worked with us to restore transparency. I rebuilt my cabin with neighbors' help, and Ira and I grew close, later moving her environmental law practice to town. We turned my shoreline into a conservation zone and started the Pinewood Legal Defense Fund with my settlement money to protect homeowners county-wide. At a lakeside celebration, I proposed new bylaws to prevent HOA abuse, which passed overwhelmingly. Raising a toast to Grandpa, I said, "He fought for this lake and we saved it together." Pinewood became a true community. Potlucks, shared docks, kids playing where condos would have stood. Oh, and I sent Karen a framed copy of my survey for her new Minim All office in Nevada, a little reminder to read the fine print. Hit that bell for more wild stories. and I'll catch you in the next one.